Hey, so in this video, I want to talk about the concept of pre-rolls. So here I have an example of a waterfall, and you might wonder what waterfall, that waterfall. And that's exactly the point. As you can see, it took a while before the water actually hit the ground. And even though we haven't talked about flip simulations yet, the same is true for Pops or Vellum or Pyro or whatever. Sometimes, actually very often, your simulation needs a little bit of time to kind of get to the point where you want to show it. So for example, here my waterfall actually starts up here at the top, and it just takes a while before it actually creates a proper stream. And this might be an extreme example, but you have a problem like this all the time. Now, what that means is, okay, you could just start rendering at frame, I don't know, 73 or something, but of course that's pretty problematic when you want to cut this later on, especially when you want to put it on top of something else. So just changing your render frame range is not a good idea. So what usually is done is you just change your starting frame of your simulation to be earlier than what you render. So for example, I could say I start at frame 50 before the simulation, which means I would start at frame minus 50. And as soon as I do this and I look at the result, even at frame 1, he would start simulating, because he would simulate the first 50 frames before I can actually see what happens at frame 1. This actually works, but it's not a pretty good way of handling things, because you will end up with negative numbers in your framing, especially when you cache that thing out. You have this somewhat problematic negative frame thing, which I would generally recommend not doing. Do not work with negative frames. So how do you solve this? Well, you might have noticed that, and let me stop this here. You might have noticed that in some of my videos, I actually don't start my scene at frame 1, but I start at frame 1001. And then maybe I go to frame 1240. Something like that. And this is actually something most studios, well, all studios I ever worked for, but most studios for sure that work in the industry work similar to that. They don't start at the first frame, they start at a frame with a big buffer. And this means you can still start your simulation earlier than your render frame range. In this case, this would be frame 950, for example. And you will not end up with negative numbers in your caching. So if I cache this now, I would just make sure that I cache from frame 950 to whatever it is I want. And then I just render a different frame range than that later on. And this is called a pre-roll, because there's something happening before the camera is rolling. So this is a pretty common thing, and when you work at a company, you should just ask them how they handle pre-rolls, because it's such a common problem. So I hope this is helpful as a concept. Thanks very much, and see you later. Cheers.